The morning sun had barely pierced the horizon when Flight 472 to Seattle prepared for departure from a busy East Coast airport. Commuters hustled along the terminal, dragging suitcases, clutching coffee cups, and juggling boarding passes. For most, it was a routine flight, a mundane 4-hour journey sandwiched between meetings, errands, and family obligations. But in the midst of this orchestrated chaos, one passenger stood out, or perhaps, for most, did not. She moved with quiet precision, her steps measured and deliberate. The woman was in her late 40s, neither gaudy nor attention-seeking, yet there was an intangible air about her, a subtle command of presence that made anyone briefly aware of her existence pause. Dressed in plain clothes, navy slacks, a fitted gray jacket, and simple flats, she carried only a small backpack. No flashy luggage, no designer label, no overt display of wealth or status. To the casual observer, she was unremarkable. Passengers barely noticed her. Some stole quick glances, unconsciously measuring her age, her demeanor, her appearance. A few muttered small judgments that she was serious, or perhaps stern, or maybe just someone who didn't like to chat. But none could have guessed the truth. This woman was not an ordinary traveler on a domestic flight. She was a Navy SEAL colonel, one of the most decorated in the country, a veteran of countless high-risk missions, many so classified they did not even appear in official records. Her life had been a constant ballet of strategy, danger, and discipline. And today, that life would intersect unexpectedly with the routine chaos of commercial aviation. The boarding process was delayed. A mechanical check had taken longer than expected, and the cabin crew were tense. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Jessica, ran her fingers through her ponytail, trying to manage a restless cabin filled with passengers on tight schedules. The pilot, seated in the cockpit, monitored the situation with impatience. He had a tight schedule, with multiple flights to follow, and every delay was a threat to his carefully calibrated timeline. Stress hung over the cabin like a low cloud, invisible but suffocating. The colonel moved forward in the boarding line, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the growing irritation of the crew. She maintained an upright posture, shoulders relaxed but purposeful, and her eyes scanned the cabin as she approached her assigned seat. She noticed subtle tensions: a mother struggling with a child's backpack, a businessman muttering into his phone, the flurry of activity as attendants tried to calm passengers who had grown impatient. It was a scene she could read in seconds: patterns, weaknesses, stress points. Years of training had made her attuned to such dynamics. As she reached her seat, she noticed a minor problem. The passenger assigned to her row was already seated, his carry-on encroaching on her space. With a calm voice, she requested a small adjustment. "Excuse me, I believe this row is assigned to me. Would you mind sliding your bag slightly so I can settle in?" Her tone was polite, almost gentle but precise. The words were simple, the request straightforward, yet the flight attendant misread it. Jessica's face tightened, interpreting the colonel's calm authority as confrontation. "Ma'am, please wait your turn," she snapped, her voice tinged with irritation. "Everything will be fine." The pilot, alerted by the commotion, looked over from the cockpit. He had already been stressed by the delay and the restless passengers. In his mind, he saw yet another passenger pushing back against crew instructions. He didn't know who she was. All he saw was someone challenging authority, someone potentially problematic. "Is there an issue?" he asked, his tone firm. "She wants me to move this bag," Jessica replied, her frustration evident. The colonel didn't react. She simply explained again, her voice even, calm, and non-threatening. "I'm only asking for a minor adjustment so I can sit comfortably. That's all." But the pilot's interpretation was colored by his stress and assumptions. He saw defiance rather than politeness, challenge rather than request. Passengers looked on, murmuring softly, unsure if this minor dispute would escalate. The woman's demeanor remained unchanged. Her presence was quietly commanding, not loud, not angry, not threatening, but undeniably noticeable. She exuded the kind of calm confidence that could only come from decades of experience, handling far more critical situations than a seating dispute on a commercial flight. As tension rose, the colonel scanned the cabin subtly, noting other passengers' reactions. Some avoided eye contact, unsure why the woman's presence seemed unusual. Others were curious, observing the growing interaction between crew and passenger. She had learned long ago that perception often preceded reality. In most situations, appearances could dictate behavior before facts did. Here, in this airport, the appearance of a difficult passenger was misleading. The flight attendant, flustered and exhausted from the day, made a snap decision. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside, ma'am." The colonel's expression remained calm, almost serene. She without hesitation gathering her backpack and moving toward the jet bridge. Her movements were measured, smooth, almost graceful, the kind of control only someone who had faced life-or-death situations could maintain. Passengers whispered. Some assumed she had been rude or belligerent. None realized the truth. She was trained to control her reactions, to de-escalate situations, and to never act impulsively. Outside the aircraft door, she paused. She looked back at the plane, the crew, and the passengers. Her eyes were steady, alert. She could read the tension, the frustration, the misjudgment. In another life, this might have been a dangerous operation where her ability to observe, adapt, and respond quickly could save lives. Here, it was just a misunderstanding, but she treated it with the same composure she had always maintained. Airport security arrived, drawn by the unfolding drama. Their casual approach shifted immediately as they noticed her. Something about her presence demanded attention. She handed over her identification without fuss, her calm demeanor never wavering. The officers scanned her credentials, and their reactions shifted from routine professionalism to surprise and respect. They saw her rank, her history, and her decorated service record. Suddenly, the quiet passenger they had assumed was revealed to be extraordinary. Inside, the crew and passengers had no idea what had just happened. The pilot, confident moments before, had acted on assumptions and stress. The woman who seemed so ordinary was a SEAL colonel, trained to operate in extreme conditions, lead missions under fire, and navigate dangerous environments with precision and authority. What they had witnessed was a collision of misunderstanding and perception, a test of assumptions against reality. And this was only the beginning. The boarding process had been fraught with delays, and the cabin's tension was almost palpable. Passengers shifted impatiently in their seats, muttering about late departures, overhead bins, and the ever-present hum of frustration that seemed to follow any large airport terminal. The woman, the quiet passenger whose presence had already caused subtle unease, now stood near her assigned row, waiting for the situation to resolve. Her movements were deliberate and calm, belying the storm brewing around her. The flight attendant, Jessica, had grown increasingly irritable. She had been managing the morning boarding since before dawn, juggling cranky travelers, luggage mishaps, and a flight schedule that seemed to have a mind of its own. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, landed on the woman again. The request to move a bag, which had seemed minor at first, now felt like a personal challenge. "Ma'am," Jessica said, her voice sharper than before, "I understand you want to sit here, but the flight is delayed and we need to get people seated quickly. Can you please be patient?" The colonel, unflustered, tilted her head slightly and smiled faintly. "Of course," she replied, her voice calm, measured, almost soothing. "I'm simply asking for a small adjustment so that I can sit in my assigned seat. It will only take a moment." The words were innocuous, but Jessica misread the tone. Her mind, already frayed by stress, interpreted the calm as resistance. She took a deep breath and crossed her arms, trying to assert authority. Around them, other passengers watched quietly, sensing a minor confrontation about to escalate. At that moment, the pilot appeared at the front of the cabin. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, a sign of long hours and mounting frustration. He had been watching the boarding process unfold via the crew's updates and had grown increasingly impatient. He scanned the situation quickly. A passenger questioning instructions, a flight attendant looking flustered, a cabin filled with restless travelers. In his mind, a simple solution presented itself: remove the passenger who was causing the disturbance. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone firm, commanding. Jessica pointed toward the woman. "She's refusing to comply, asking for adjustments that are unnecessary. It's slowing boarding." The colonel didn't react defensively. Instead, she maintained perfect posture, her hands resting lightly on her backpack. She spoke again, her voice calm but deliberate. "I am not refusing to comply. I am simply requesting a small adjustment so that I can sit in the space assigned to me. I assure you, it will not delay boarding significantly." The pilot's patience thinned. To him, this was no longer a minor misunderstanding. It was defiance. He had encountered difficult passengers before, and he had learned to act decisively to maintain control. Yet in his mind, he had no idea who he was confronting. The woman before him was not an ordinary passenger. She was someone who had led teams in life-or-death situations, someone who could remain calm under fire, someone who commanded respect without raising her voice. Jessica, sensing the pilot's agreement, stepped back slightly, relieved that the authority now seemed aligned with her own instincts. The colonel, however, remained unshaken. She understood the dynamics perfectly. Human beings often react on assumption rather than observation, and in this case she could see that assumptions were about to dictate actions. She did not panic. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood, poised, waiting for the next move. Passengers began to murmur. Some whispered questions to their neighbors. "What's going on? Why is she being asked to move?" Others quietly recorded the interaction on their phones, sensing that this minor disturbance might escalate into something more dramatic. The cabin's atmosphere was thick with anticipation, a mix of curiosity and tension. Then the pilot spoke again, this time louder. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the aircraft." The words were final, uncompromising. The cabin went silent. The woman paused, her expression unchanged. She nodded politely, collected her small backpack, and moved toward the jet bridge. Her movements were smooth, precise, almost effortless. Passengers watched, some shaking their heads, others trying to hide smirks, imagining a defiant passenger being put in her place. Yet no one noticed the subtle authority in her stride, the quiet confidence that spoke of a lifetime of experience navigating far more dangerous situations than this. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the colonel's calm eyes swept across the cabin one last time. She observed the crew, the passengers, the pilot, every detail registered. Her mind cataloged stress levels, emotional reactions, and body language, the way a seasoned strategist assesses a battlefield. She could see who was anxious, who was defiant, who was simply confused. Every person reacted according to their perception of authority, not reality. Airport security, alerted by the pilot's report, arrived quickly. 2 uniformed officers approached her, asking for identification. She handed over her ID, her composure unshaken. The officers scanned her credentials, and their expressions shifted instantly. What had seemed like a routine passenger issue transformed into something far more significant. Her identification revealed her as a Navy SEAL colonel, a veteran of covert operations, decorated in missions that few knew existed. Security officers exchanged glances, suddenly aware that they were no longer dealing with an ordinary traveler, but with someone whose life had been defined by courage, discipline, and leadership under extreme conditions. The quiet woman in front of them was someone who had faced situations far more perilous than a misunderstanding at a boarding gate. Back in the cabin, passengers remained oblivious to her true identity. The pilot paced nervously, his earlier confidence giving way to subtle unease. He had acted decisively, following protocol as he understood it, but he had no idea that the passenger he removed was far more formidable than he could imagine. Meanwhile, the colonel stood silently, observing the interactions around her. She had learned over decades of military service that control and composure were as powerful as any weapon. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand respect. Yet in that moment, her mere presence began to shift the energy around her. Even the security officers, now aware of her rank and achievements, treated her with a respect born of experience and instinct. The passengers began to notice subtle changes. Whispers spread, "Who is she? I think she's military. Did you see how calm she is?" Curiosity mixed with awe. Something about her commanded attention without the need for theatrics. Every step, every gesture, every word was precise, measured, and deliberate. The flight attendant, Jessica, felt a pang of guilt. She had misjudged this woman entirely. Her irritation, born of stress, had led her to escalate a minor disagreement unnecessarily. Now, faced with the reality of the colonel's identity, she realized how fragile her assumptions had been. The quiet passenger they had dismissed as difficult was actually extraordinary, disciplined, courageous, and unflinchingly composed. Security officers began asking questions, politely but firmly, trying to understand how to resolve the situation. The colonel responded with clarity, answering all inquiries calmly, never raising her voice, never showing frustration. Her presence seemed to ground the chaos around her. People began to recognize that appearances can be deceiving. This unassuming woman had orchestrated far more complex operations than anyone in the terminal could imagine. And so, the stage was set. What began as a routine flight had become the intersection of authority, misjudgment, and extraordinary experience. The passengers, the crew, and the pilot were all about to learn a lesson in humility, discipline, and respect. The colonel's quiet demeanor masked a lifetime of service that had prepared her for far more dangerous encounters than a boarding gate confrontation. In that moment, nobody knew exactly what would happen next, but one thing was certain. The flight, the crew, and the passengers would never forget the day they misjudged a Navy SEAL colonel. The corridor of the jet bridge felt unusually tense. The quiet hum of the airport, the murmur of passengers, and the distant echo of rolling luggage seemed to fade in her presence. The Navy SEAL colonel, poised and composed, moved with a calm efficiency that suggested she had long been accustomed to navigating high-pressure situations. Every step she took was deliberate, measured, and purposeful. She had long learned that control over oneself often meant control over the environment. Yet, in this ordinary airport, she faced a challenge unlike any mission she had led, misjudgment born of stress and assumption. The flight attendant, Jessica, had visibly relaxed when the colonel agreed to step aside, thinking the situation had been diffused. She assumed that once the passenger was outside the aircraft, the problem would end and boarding could resume. But the quiet confidence exuded by the woman unsettled her in subtle ways. It was as if every movement, every glance, carried the weight of experience far beyond the mundane environment of a domestic flight. Jessica tried to dismiss the feeling, blaming fatigue and frustration, but she couldn't shake the impression that she had encountered someone remarkable. The pilot packing near the gate had called over airport security. He had acted decisively, confident in his authority. "I want this passenger removed from the aircraft," he told them, his voice carrying an edge of finality. He believed the situation was straightforward. A passenger had refused instructions and needed to be escorted away. In his mind, the flight's schedule and authority hierarchy justified his decision. What he did not know, and could not see in that moment, was that the woman he had deemed problematic was someone who had faced far greater challenges, the kind that demanded courage, precision, and resilience. The colonel, for her part, remained calm. She, without hesitation, collecting her small backpack, adjusting the strap over her shoulder, and moving toward the jet bridge exit with steady, measured steps. Her face remained neutral, her expression unreadable to the casual observer. There was no sign of anger, no trace of irritation, no hint of impatience. She walked as though each step were deliberate, each action intentional, a reflection of decades of discipline. To the untrained eye, she seemed simply a polite passenger. To anyone who could perceive it, her every move carried authority. Passengers on the plane craned their necks to watch, some whispering to neighbors, others quietly capturing video on phones. Their reactions ranged from amusement to bewilderment to mild irritation. They saw only a passenger being asked to leave, a seemingly trivial conflict blown out of proportion. What they did not see, and could not yet understand, was the silent command she radiated, the aura of someone who had survived situations most could not imagine. The misunderstanding was poised to shift dramatically, and the seeds of awe and respect were already taking root among those paying attention. As she reached the open doorway to the jet bridge, she paused for a moment, glancing back at the cabin. Her eyes swept across the rows of passengers, taking in body language, facial expressions, and posture. She registered stress, impatience, curiosity, and confusion, cataloging each reaction with the precision of a strategist. This was no different from a battlefield exercise in observation. Only here, the stakes seemed minor compared to her usual missions. Yet she understood instinctively that human behavior under stress rarely changed, whether in a combat zone or an airport terminal. Airport security officers, two uniformed men with measured professionalism, stepped toward her. Their initial expressions were standard, routine, procedural, attentive. The colonel handed over her identification without hesitation, her movements fluid, practiced. The officers examined the ID, and a subtle change occurred. Their eyes widened slightly, their postures adjusted, and a quiet, almost imperceptible respect entered their demeanor. This was no ordinary passenger. The credentials revealed her as a Navy SEAL colonel, decorated, highly trained, and experienced in covert operations that few would ever learn about. The shift in energy was palpable. What had seemed like a simple dispute over seating and authority suddenly transformed into a situation with weight and consequence. The pilot, still stationed near the aircraft, was unaware of this revelation. He had acted on assumptions, enforcing perceived rules without knowledge of the extraordinary life of the passenger he had dismissed. The officers, now fully cognizant of her identity, began communicating in hushed tones, aware that they were handling someone with a level of expertise and authority far beyond the ordinary. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, the passengers continued to speculate. Conversations quieted to whispers as curiosity rippled through the cabin. Some noticed the subtle change in security behavior outside the window. Others began to sense that the situation was no longer trivial, that the passenger they had watched leave the plane might be someone remarkable. The rumor began to spread, a whisper here, a speculative question there, that the woman outside was not what she seemed. The intrigue grew, tension coiling like a spring. The colonel waited patiently as security confirmed her credentials. There was no sign of impatience, no flicker of agitation. She understood that authority often depended on perception, and that human beings often acted on incomplete information. In this instance, she had allowed others to act, to assume, to misjudge, and yet she remained composed, demonstrating the power of restraint. The lesson she unconsciously imparted was subtle yet profound. True authority does not require raising one's voice or asserting dominance. It emerges naturally from presence, discipline, and competence. The pilot, noticing the activity outside, began to piece together that the situation might be more complex than he had realized. He had acted with authority, confident in the rules and the necessity of enforcing them. Yet, as he observed the growing respect shown by security personnel and the quiet confidence of the passenger, a creeping doubt began to emerge. Perhaps he had misjudged the situation entirely. Perhaps the woman he had removed was far more capable and important than he had any notion of. Passengers pressed their faces to the windows, watching the unfolding scene with curiosity and growing anticipation. Phones were discreetly raised, capturing video, documenting what they assumed was a minor incident but sensing, instinctively, that it was about to escalate in significance. The tension in the terminal was a mix of curiosity, awe, and suspense. Everyone could feel it, even if they could not yet articulate why. And then came the subtle but unmistakable realization. The officers, whispering to each other, began to treat the colonel with an unspoken deference. Their posture, tone, and language shifted almost imperceptibly, but perceptibly enough that anyone watching could notice the change. This was not routine security protocol. This was acknowledgement of experience, authority, and respect earned over decades of extraordinary service. The pilot, observing all of this, felt a rush of disbelief. The certainty he had carried moments ago was replaced by a stark awareness of his misjudgment. His authority in this instance, derived solely from his position, was overshadowed by the tangible presence of someone who had earned respect through courage, skill, and leadership in far more perilous circumstances. It was a humbling revelation. The colonel, standing quietly, allowed the lesson to unfold naturally. She did not gloat, nor did she assert dominance. She simply waited, her posture calm, her gaze steady, her movements deliberate. In that quiet patience, the principles that had guided her through decades of high-risk missions: observation, composure, and restraint. The misjudgment of the pilot, the irritation of the flight attendant, and the whispers of passengers all became part of a tableau illustrating human behavior under stress, and the power of unassuming authority. As Part 3 draws to a close, the stage is set for a revelation that will astonish everyone involved. The quiet passenger, removed from the plane under assumptions of defiance, is about to command respect not through confrontation, but through the undeniable weight of experience, skill, and presence. The misunderstanding has become a lesson, the ordinary airport terminal transformed into a theater of revelation, and the passengers, crew, and pilot are all participants in a story they will not soon forget. The airport terminal was unusually quiet, the low murmur of travelers fading into the background as security officers processed the situation. The Navy SEAL colonel stood with the poise of someone accustomed to high-pressure encounters, her posture impeccable, her gaze steady. She had handed over her identification with the same calm efficiency that had defined her entire career, yet the response it triggered was anything but ordinary. The officers, scanning her credentials, froze. Recognition passed between them in subtle glances, the kind that only happens when someone realizes they are in the presence of true authority. Her ID revealed her rank, her achievements, and her decades of service in the Navy SEALs. It displayed accolades few had heard of, and operations so classified they scarcely existed in public records. The initial assumption that she was a difficult passenger causing a minor disruption evaporated instantly. The officers' tone shifted, their professional detachment giving way to awe and respect. One of them, a younger man who had only been on the force for a few years, struggled to hide his astonishment. "She's a SEAL colonel," he murmured, barely audibly. The words seemed almost inadequate to convey the gravity of what they had discovered. The colonel observed quietly, noting the subtle change in their behavior. She understood human nature, the ways assumptions could dictate responses, and the way perceived authority could sway actions. She had seen it countless times in missions where misjudgment could be deadly. Here, it was a mundane misunderstanding blown into a spectacle, yet the lesson remained the same. Appearances deceive, and true capability is often hidden beneath calm composure. Back on the plane, passengers were oblivious to the full extent of the revelation. Some were beginning to notice a subtle shift in security personnel behavior, their movements careful and measured, their posture rigid but respectful. The whispers in the cabin grew louder. "Who is she?" one passenger asked. "I think she's military," another speculated. Curiosity began to ripple through the rows of travelers, blending with awe and intrigue. Everyone instinctively understood that the woman they had seen removed from the plane was not ordinary. Meanwhile, the pilot, standing near the aircraft with arms crossed, began to sense that something significant had occurred. He had acted decisively, enforcing what he believed were the rules of air travel, but the subtle changes in behavior among security officers suggested a new reality. Doubt crept into his mind, unbidden and uncomfortable. The quiet passenger, whom he had dismissed as challenging and difficult, was suddenly revealed to be someone whose very presence commanded respect. The colonel, ever observant, noted the pilot's demeanor from her position near the security checkpoint. He was shifting uneasily, scanning the area, clearly aware that he may have misjudged the situation. Yet he had no idea of the full scope of her identity or the years of experience and leadership she brought to every challenge. She had faced missions in hostile territories, led teams in life-and-death situations, and made decisions under pressure that could mean the difference between life and death. Compared to those challenges, this airport incident was minor, yet it provided a unique opportunity to demonstrate restraint, patience, and quiet authority. Security officers approached the pilot, speaking in hushed tones. The younger officer, still wide-eyed, explained carefully, "Sir, ma'am, she is not just a passenger. She is a Navy SEAL colonel, decorated, high-level operation, significant leadership experience." The pilot's eyes widened. His certainty wavered as the words sank in. He had acted on assumptions and stress, assuming he was maintaining control. Now, faced with the reality of the woman's identity, he felt the first stirrings of humility. The passengers inside the cabin had begun to speculate further. Conversations that had been quiet murmurs became open whispers. "Do you see how security is acting?" one woman asked. "Something about her, she's not normal," another replied. Phones were discreetly raised, capturing video of the unfolding scene, as curiosity and awe spread like wildfire. The quiet passenger had become the center of attention, a figure commanding respect without a word, a presence that radiated authority effortlessly. As the officers continued to confirm her credentials, the colonel remained composed. She answered questions with clarity, patience, and precision, never raising her voice, never showing irritation. Her calm demeanor seemed to amplify the tension around her, creating an almost magnetic aura. Those around her instinctively adjusted their behavior, straightening posture, softening tone, and speaking with measured care. It was a subtle, undeniable lesson in the power of presence and the authority of experience. The pilot, observing the scene, began to piece together the magnitude of his misjudgment. He had relied on protocol, authority, and position to enforce compliance. Yet, here was someone whose true authority could not be measured by titles alone. It was the result of decades of courage, skill, and leadership under extreme conditions. The realization was humbling. The very person he had removed from the aircraft, confident in his assumptions, was someone whose life had been defined by challenges far greater than he could imagine. Meanwhile, security officers began to confer discreetly among themselves. The atmosphere around the colonel had shifted completely. What had been a routine intervention now carried a sense of reverence and careful consideration. They were not merely following orders. They were recognizing true experience, skill, and authority. Every gesture, every word, every movement of the colonel conveyed confidence and competence. It was as if the world paused briefly to acknowledge someone who had earned the respect of every institution she had touched. Passengers craned their necks, whispering excitedly. Some speculated wildly. "She must have done something incredible overseas," one said. "No wonder security is treating her that way," another added. Even those who had initially dismissed the situation as minor began to sense the gravity of the moment. The quiet passenger who had been removed from the plane had transformed into a figure of intrigue, respect, and admiration. The colonel remained patient, fully aware that the situation was delicate. She understood the dynamics at play, the pilot's misjudgment, the crew's assumptions, and the passenger's curiosity. She allowed the officers to confirm her identity and credentials fully, knowing that the lesson would unfold naturally. There was no need for confrontation, no need for argument. Her presence alone commanded acknowledgement, and her composure ensured that the unfolding events reflected her authority without a single raised voice. Finally, the realization reached the pilot fully. He had acted on assumptions, enforcing what he believed were the rules, but he had entirely underestimated the person he confronted. His authority, derived from position and protocol, was overshadowed by the colonel's experience, discipline, and quiet command. He began to understand the gravity of his mistake, the humility of which weighed heavily on him. The officer's respect for the colonel was undeniable, and the pilot could no longer deny the truth. In that moment, the dynamics shifted completely. The quiet passenger, once dismissed, now stood as a figure of remarkable authority, commanding attention through presence and accomplishment alone. The passengers inside the aircraft, the crew, and the pilot were all witnesses to a lesson in human perception. Appearances deceive, assumptions mislead, and true authority is recognized through calm confidence, skill, and experience. As the colonel waited patiently near security, it became clear that what had begun as a minor conflict over seating had transformed into an extraordinary revelation. The misunderstanding had given way to recognition, respect, and awe. The stage was set for the next act, one in which the pilot and passengers would finally understand the magnitude of the woman they had so casually judged. The terminal seemed to hold its breath, aware in some subtle collective way that an ordinary encounter had become extraordinary. The colonel's quiet presence, her disciplined posture, and her composed demeanor had transformed the ordinary into the remarkable. What had been routine was now unforgettable, a story of authority, humility, and respect unfolding before the eyes of everyone involved. And as the final preparations were made for her next move, every observer sensed it. The quiet passenger, wrongly judged moments ago, was about to teach a powerful lesson in presence, leadership, and the understated power of experience. Inside the cabin of Flight 472, a subtle tension had begun to ripple through the rows of passengers. Phones quietly emerged, capturing what had initially seemed like a minor incident outside the plane. Whispers, hushed and tentative, spread like wildfire. "Did you see how security is acting?" a young man asked his neighbor, eyes wide. "Something's not right about her," the neighbor replied, glancing toward the windows where the quiet, composed woman now stood. No one inside yet fully understood who she was. Most had seen only a passenger politely escorted from the plane. To them, it was unusual, perhaps dramatic, but not extraordinary. Yet the sudden shift in security personnel's demeanor, the way they spoke to her with measured care and subtle deference, began to spark curiosity. Passengers instinctively felt that they were witnessing something far beyond the usual airport drama. A businessman seated mid-cabin leaned closer to his companion. "She's military, right? Look at how they're treating her," he whispered. Others nearby strained their necks, trying to get a glimpse of the woman whose calm, composed presence seemed to command attention. Phones quietly recorded the scene, some passengers whispering speculative guesses about her identity. Military, celebrity, government official. The possibilities swirled in their minds. Then a quiet voice belonging to a passenger who clearly recognized her broke the subtle murmurs. "She's a SEAL colonel," he said almost reverently. The words cut through the cabin like a sudden wind, drawing attention immediately. Heads turned, eyes widened, murmurs escalated. "A SEAL colonel," someone repeated incredulously. "Like the Navy SEALs," the confirmation spread rapidly, transforming curiosity into awe. Passengers who had been irritated or indifferent moments ago now sat upright, suddenly aware that the woman who had been removed from the plane was someone extraordinary. The ripple effect of recognition was immediate. Conversations buzzed with admiration, speculation, and intrigue. "She must have led missions no one even knows about," one whispered. "No wonder security treated her that way," said another. Cameras captured subtle expressions, respect, awe, even a hint of disbelief. The cabin's energy shifted dramatically, from minor annoyance at a boarding dispute to quiet reverence for someone whose life had been defined by courage, discipline, and leadership. Meanwhile, the pilot, still standing near the aircraft door outside, became aware of the growing murmurs. His frustration from earlier, a product of assumptions and stress, began to unravel. He had acted decisively, believing he was enforcing authority, but the situation had quickly escalated beyond his control. As whispers inside the plane reached his ears, doubt crept in. He realized he had removed someone whose authority far exceeded his own, someone who had earned respect in life-or-death circumstances. Back on the jet bridge, the SEAL colonel remained calm. She observed the passengers inside the cabin through the glass windows, noting their reactions with the same analytical precision she had learned during her years of service. Their curiosity, awe, and subtle admiration confirmed what she already knew. Perception matters, and the truth, when revealed, carries its own weight. She did not smile, nor did she gesture, but her mere presence communicated a quiet authority that left observers instinctively attentive. The flight attendant, Jessica, now stood near the cockpit door, watching the unfolding scenario. Her earlier irritation had shifted to uncertainty and awe. She had misjudged the woman entirely. What she had assumed was defiance and difficulty was, in fact, calm composure and earned authority. The realization hit her with a mix of humility and embarrassment. The quiet passenger they had treated as a problem was someone whose life had been defined by courage, strategic thinking, and unparalleled discipline. Passengers began sharing what little they knew, weaving a narrative around the SEAL colonel. "She's led rescue missions," one murmured. "I heard she's one of the top SEALs in the country," another added. Even those who had been skeptical moments earlier felt compelled to listen, their attention fully captured. The ordinary flight cabin had transformed into a theater of admiration, curiosity, and subtle reverence. Cameras recorded every detail, as if instinctively aware that this moment was extraordinary. Meanwhile, the pilot's unease continued to grow. His initial confidence, rooted in authority and procedure, had been replaced by the stark realization that he had acted prematurely. The woman he had removed from the aircraft had faced challenges that dwarfed the inconveniences of commercial flight. Decisions made under stress, actions taken with precision in life-or-death situations. This was her domain. His authority in the cabin, once unquestioned, now seemed almost insignificant compared to hers. As security officers continued their discreet assessment, the SEAL colonel answered questions calmly, with measured precision. Her demeanor, composed and confident, conveyed experience without arrogance. Every response was clear, concise, and professional. It was as if decades of training and high-stakes missions were distilled into each subtle gesture, each carefully chosen word. Those around her instinctively adjusted their behavior, posture straightened, tone softened, attention sharpened. Even the pilot, watching from a distance, could not ignore the influence she exerted without a single raised voice. Passengers now speculated about her missions. Some imagined her leading teams into hostile territories, navigating dangerous operations with tactical precision. Others wondered how many lives she had saved, how many covert operations she had overseen, and how many times she had faced extreme danger with unflinching resolve. Their imaginations ran wild, filling in the gaps left by the secrecy of her profession. The ordinary boarding gate had become a stage for recognition, respect, and a lesson in human perception. The murmurs inside the cabin had grown so loud that the flight attendant finally stepped forward. "Ladies and," she said carefully, trying to regain composure, "please remain seated. The situation outside is being handled." Yet her own tone had shifted, reflecting the subtle awe she now felt. Even she could not deny the impact of the SEAL colonel's presence. Outside, the colonel remained calm, observing, allowing the tension to resolve itself naturally. She did not need to assert herself. Her presence alone communicated authority, experience, and composure. Security officers respected her, passengers admired her, and the pilot, finally understanding the gravity of his misjudgment, grew increasingly anxious. The power of earned authority, the kind forged through courage, discipline, and high-stakes leadership, was on full display. As the realization spread, passengers began to whisper about what would happen next. Would she return to the plane? Would the pilot apologize? Could anyone really comprehend the scope of her experience? The answers were unknown, but one thing was clear. The quiet passenger who had been removed moments ago was now the focus of every eye, every camera, every whispered conversation. She had become more than a traveler. She had become a symbol of authority, resilience, and understated power. And as the cabin waited, collectively holding its breath, the stage was set for the next chapter. The SEAL colonel, whose calm and unassuming presence had already transformed perceptions, was about to demonstrate the kind of dignity, patience, and quiet command that only someone with her extraordinary background could wield. The pilot, the crew, and the passengers would soon confront the full truth, and the flight would never again be just another routine journey. In that moment, inside the cabin and across the jet bridge, a subtle but undeniable lesson was unfolding. Appearances can deceive, assumptions can mislead, and true authority often remains invisible until the world demands recognition. The quiet passenger had become, in the span of minutes, a figure commanding attention, respect, and admiration, all without raising her voice, all without confrontation, all with nothing more than the power of her presence and the weight of her experience. The pilot, still standing near the jet bridge, felt a growing unease that he could no longer ignore. What had initially seemed like a simple matter, a passenger refusing to follow instructions, had transformed into something far more significant. The subtle shift in security officers' demeanor, the whispered exchanges between passengers, and the growing attention toward the SEAL colonel all signaled a reality he was only beginning to comprehend. His initial confidence, based entirely on position and authority, now teetered on the edge of embarrassment and disbelief. The security officers approached him carefully, their posture respectful but firm. They had fully the woman's credentials and, in doing so, had confronted the pilot with undeniable facts. One officer, slightly older and with the demeanor of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations, spoke first. "Sir, I need to clarify something about the passenger you had removed. She is not an ordinary traveler." The pilot's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight with unease. "She is a Navy SEAL colonel," the officer replied. "Decorated, experienced in operations that few have knowledge of. You removed someone whose authority and experience far exceed that of a typical passenger." The words hit him like a sudden gust of cold air. His certainty, which had fueled his decisive action, began to crumble. "A SEAL colonel," he repeated, disbelief creeping into his tone. "Are you serious?" The officers nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. We've confirmed her identity. She has led high-risk missions, commanded teams in dangerous environments, and is highly respected in military circles. Your decision to remove her was based on a misunderstanding of her demeanor, not any misconduct on her part." The pilot's stomach tightened. He could feel the weight of his error pressing down on him. Every assumption he had made, every moment of confidence, had been undermined by the revelation of her true identity. He realized that in his effort to maintain control, he had misjudged someone whose real authority came not from title or position, but from skill, courage, and experience earned over decades. Back on the jet bridge, the SEAL colonel remained calm, observing everything with quiet patience. She understood the situation perfectly. She could feel the pilot's uncertainty, the officer's cautious respect, and the subtle shifts in the energy around her. Her posture remained steady, her expression neutral, yet every gesture communicated the discipline and composure of someone who had navigated far more complex and dangerous scenarios than a commercial flight could ever present. The passengers, still seated inside the aircraft, were beginning to notice the tension outside. Their curiosity grew as cameras discreetly recorded the unfolding events. Whispers spread. "The pilot looks worried," one passenger murmured. "Security seems unusually respectful," another noted. The story was evolving in real time, each moment adding layers of intrigue and suspense. What had started as a minor incident now held the attention of everyone present, passengers and crew alike. The flight attendant, Jessica, had stepped aside, watching the interaction silently. Her initial irritation and frustration had been replaced by awe and humility. She had misjudged the SEAL colonel completely, and now she understood the gravity of the error. Every movement of the woman outside demonstrated patience, authority, and composure, without a single word of confrontation. Jessica realized that true leadership and respect did not need to be asserted forcefully, they could simply be embodied. The pilot, struggling to regain composure, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I mean Colonel," he said, finally addressing her directly. I apologize. I didn't know who you were. I acted hastily and I realize now it was a mistake. I meant no disrespect." The SEAL colonel regarded him silently for a moment. Her calm gaze was unwavering, her posture impeccable. She could have responded sharply, could have highlighted his error in public, could have allowed him to feel the full weight of embarrassment. Instead, she chose the path of grace. A slight, almost imperceptible nod conveyed acknowledgement and acceptance of the apology. "It's all right," she said quietly, her voice even and measured. "These situations happen. Misunderstandings occur, especially when stress and assumptions influence judgment. I bear no resentment." The pilot exhaled, relief and humility mixing in equal measure. He had expected confrontation, perhaps anger or reprimand. Instead, he encountered composure, professionalism, and dignity. It was a lesson in leadership he would not forget. He realized that authority exercised through patience, experience, and calm presence far outweighed authority exercised through position alone. Security officers, witnessing the exchange, straightened their posture, reflecting the subtle authority that the SEAL colonel radiated. They knew that they had been dealing with someone extraordinary, someone whose actions and demeanor demanded respect without question. The lesson was clear. Real authority is earned, not assumed, and it often manifests in quiet, understated ways. Passengers inside the plane were captivated by the unfolding scene. The whispers grew louder, blending with awe and admiration. "Did you hear that? She just forgave him," one said. "She didn't yell, didn't make a scene," another added. Cameras recorded her composed demeanor, her polite handling of the apology, and the subtle command she exerted over the situation without any aggression. The narrative was shifting in real time, from a minor boarding dispute to a story of courage, leadership, and understated power. The pilot, now visibly humbled, gestured toward the colonel. "Please, ma'am, Colonel, if you would allow me, we'd like to have you back on the plane. I insist that you take the first-class seat and any accommodations you require. I understand the error I made, and I want to correct it." The SEAL colonel, ever composed, nodded slightly. "Thank you," she replied. "I appreciate the acknowledgement. I will return to the plane." Her voice was calm, precise, and unassuming, yet it carried the weight of decades of experience commanding respect without confrontation. As she moved back toward the aircraft, the passengers observed every detail. Their earlier assumptions had been shattered. The woman who had been removed, seemingly ordinary, was extraordinary. Every gesture, every movement, every word spoke to her discipline, her leadership, and her composure. The cabin, once filled with irritation and impatience, now held a collective sense of admiration and curiosity. Cameras recorded discreetly, passengers whispered excitedly, and the story began to take on a life of its own. The flight attendant, Jessica, offered a seat in first class to the colonel, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. The pilot assisted personally, ensuring her comfort. Every movement, every word, reflected the profound shift in perception that had occurred. What had begun as a minor misunderstanding had evolved into a lesson in humility, leadership, and respect. Inside the cabin, passengers quietly acknowledged the significance of the moment. Conversations focused on her accomplishments, the composure she had maintained, and the grace with which she handled the apology. Even those who had initially judged her harshly were now captivated, fully aware that they had witnessed something remarkable. The flight, once routine, had become a story of courage, discipline, and human dignity. The colonel settled into her seat, calm and composed, observing the reactions of the passengers and crew. She carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that comes from experience, not position, from courage, not entitlement. The lesson she imparted required no force, no confrontation, no drama. It was simply the embodiment of discipline, respect, and understated leadership. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the pilot, flight attendants, and passengers alike reflected on the events that had unfolded. A routine flight had become an extraordinary lesson. Appearances can deceive, assumptions can mislead, And true authority is often revealed not through confrontation, but through composure, skill, and the quiet confidence born of experience. And in that moment, the SEAL colonel, the quiet passenger who had been misjudged and removed from the plane, had transformed the ordinary into the remarkable, teaching a powerful lesson in respect, humility, and the subtle yet undeniable authority of true leadership. The SEAL colonel, calm and composed, moved down the jet bridge with the grace of someone fully aware of her presence and its impact. The pilot, now standing nearby, felt a gnawing mixture of humility and awe. His authority, once unquestioned, had been challenged not by confrontation or anger, but by quiet confidence and experience far beyond his own. He had acted hastily, based on assumptions and stress, yet here stood a woman who had faced situations where hesitation or error could cost lives. Passengers inside the aircraft craned their necks, watching as the scene outside continued to unfold. Cameras discreetly recorded every detail, capturing a narrative far richer than any ordinary boarding delay. Whispers spread through the cabin, punctuated by audible gasps and murmurs of disbelief. "She's a SEAL colonel, really," one passenger whispered. "Can you imagine what she's been through?" another replied. The story had transformed from a simple conflict into a captivating human drama, capturing the fascination of everyone aboard. The flight attendant, Jessica, who had been managing the situation from the moment boarding began, now stood near the first-class cabin, ensuring everything was in order. Her earlier frustration had given way to humility. She realized how thoroughly she had misjudged the woman. What she had assumed to be a difficult passenger was, in fact, someone whose quiet composure and disciplined leadership at the highest level. She stepped aside respectfully, giving the colonel space to return to her seat. The pilot, still feeling the weight of his mistake, finally gathered the courage to speak directly to her. His tone, previously sharp and authoritative, had softened with genuine remorse. "Colonel, I sincerely apologize for my actions," he said. "I acted hastily, based on incomplete information, and I want to make this right. Please accept my apology." The colonel paused, observing him carefully. Her eyes, calm and unwavering, assessed his sincerity. She could have expressed anger, could have highlighted his error in front of the passengers, could have emphasized the disparity between his assumptions and reality. But instead, she chose grace. A slight nod of acknowledgement, measured and precise, conveyed her acceptance. "It's understood," she said quietly, her voice even, deliberate, and composed. "Mistakes happen, especially under stress. What matters is how we respond afterward." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience gained from decades of high-stakes decision-making. She did not seek to humiliate. She chose to teach, subtly, a lesson in humility and composure. The pilot, visibly relieved, nodded. He gestured toward first class. "Please, allow me to personally escort you to your seat. Any accommodations you require, I will ensure are met." His posture reflected the humility he had learned in an instant, that authority is not only about enforcing rules but also about recognizing true leadership when it stands before you. Passengers inside the cabin were now fully aware of the extraordinary nature of the woman who had been removed. Whispers turned into quiet admiration, as speculation about her identity and achievements swirled through the rows. "She's a SEAL colonel. Imagine what she's accomplished," one passenger murmured. "I can't even fathom the kind of missions she's led," another said. Cameras continued to capture the moment, recording subtle expressions of respect, awe, and curiosity. The SEAL colonel accepted the pilot's escort with quiet dignity, moving down the aisle with the same calm precision she had displayed since boarding. Her every gesture exuded confidence and discipline. Passengers instinctively gave her space, their attention riveted by the aura of authority she radiated without raising her voice or asserting dominance. It was a lesson in presence, in the subtle yet undeniable power of experience and skill. As she reached her seat in first class, the pilot and flight attendants ensured that she was fully comfortable. The pilot, still processing the gravity of his mistake, offered a final apology. "Colonel, I cannot overstate how sorry I am for my earlier actions. I hope you can forgive my error." The colonel nodded again, accepting the apology with quiet grace. "Acknowledgement and understanding are more important than dwelling on mistakes," she said. "What matters is learning from them." Her words resonated far beyond the immediate situation, a subtle but profound lesson for everyone present. Passengers who had initially been annoyed or indifferent now sat in attentive silence, fully engaged in the unfolding story. Phones captured not just her presence but the subtle interactions that conveyed her authority and composure. Even those who had not recognized her military background instinctively sensed her significance. The flight, once routine, had transformed into a narrative of respect, leadership, and the power of understated authority. The flight attendant, Jessica, now stood quietly, watching the colonel settle into her seat. She felt a profound sense of humility. Her earlier irritation had been based on assumptions, and now she realized how completely she had misjudged the situation. The lesson was clear. True leadership and respect are not demanded. They are observed, earned, and acknowledged through presence, composure, and skill. The pilot, seated briefly in the cockpit to regain his composure, reflected on the events. He had learned an immediate and humbling lesson in assumptions, authority, and human perception. The woman he had removed was extraordinary not because of her rank or decorations, but because of the quiet confidence, discipline, and grace she displayed. Authority, he realized, could be wielded more powerfully through calm presence than through position alone. Meanwhile, the passengers, now fully invested in the story, whispered among themselves. "Did you hear what she said?" one asked. "She didn't even raise her voice." "She just radiates authority," another replied. The narrative had transformed into a living lesson, unfolding in real time as everyone witnessed the interaction between the pilot, the crew, and the SEAL colonel. The SEAL colonel, ever observant, noted the reactions around her. She understood human behavior under stress, the subtle ways assumptions can distort perception, and the power of composure in correcting misunderstandings. By accepting the pilot's apology with grace, she had transformed a potentially humiliating situation into a lesson in respect, leadership, and empathy. Every passenger, crew member, and security officer had been subtly taught the same lesson she had practiced throughout her career. True authority commands respect without demanding it. As the flight prepared for takeoff, the cabin atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as a minor boarding conflict had evolved into a story of humility, leadership, and the understated power of experience. The SEAL colonel, seated calmly in first class, had demonstrated that true authority does not rely on intimidation or aggression. It relies on discipline, composure, and the ability to navigate human behavior with precision. Passengers continued to whisper, their fascination undiminished. "I've never seen anything like this," one murmured. "She's incredible." Cameras captured the subtleties of her presence, the way she remained calm, composed, and dignified, even in the face of misunderstanding and confrontation. It was a moment that would resonate far beyond the confines of a single flight. The pilot, now fully humbled, made a mental note of the lessons learned. Authority is fleeting if not tempered with humility. Assumptions can lead to mistakes. And above all, true leadership is recognized not through enforcement but through the quiet demonstration of skill, composure, and integrity. He had learned this lesson firsthand, in a moment that began with misunderstanding and concluded with profound respect. And so, as the plane ascended into the sky, the cabin carried with it a shared sense of awe and respect. The passengers, crew, and pilot had all witnessed something extraordinary: the power of quiet authority, earned through experience and displayed with grace. The SEAL colonel, the quiet passenger who had been misjudged moments ago, had transformed an ordinary flight into a story that would be remembered long after wheels touched the tarmac. Her presence had not only corrected a misunderstanding, but had also provided a living lesson in humility, leadership, and human perception. The incident was no longer about a boarding dispute. It was about the extraordinary impact a single person, composed and disciplined, could have on everyone around her. The flight continued, and though the engines hummed and the clicked, the story lingered. In every whisper, every glance, every captured image, the passengers were reminded of a simple yet profound truth. True authority commands respect not through intimidation, but through calm composure, skill, and the quiet power of experience. The engines roared steadily as the plane gained altitude, leaving the airport behind and the tense moments of boarding far below. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The hum of ordinary travel was now accompanied by quiet conversations filled with admiration, reflection, and curiosity. Passengers leaned closer to one another, sharing whispered observations about the SEAL colonel, the extraordinary presence they had witnessed firsthand. Some recounted her calm composure, others the way she had accepted the pilot's apology with grace and dignity. The narrative had transformed from a minor inconvenience into an unforgettable story of respect, leadership, and human insight. For the flight attendants, the day had taken on an entirely new significance. Jessica, who had first been irritated by the situation, now moved with a subtle smile, reflecting on the lesson she had learned. "I completely misjudged her," she admitted quietly to a colleague. "I thought she was just a difficult passenger, but everything about her, it's like she carries authority naturally. You just can't ignore it." Her words carried the humility of someone who had recognized firsthand the power of composure and earned respect. The pilot, seated in the cockpit, exhaled deeply. He replayed every moment of the incident in his mind: the initial boarding dispute, the removal of the passenger, the hushed discussions with security, and finally, the acceptance of his apology by the SEAL colonel. The humility he felt was profound, yet it was accompanied by gratitude for the unexpected lesson. In decades of flying, he had never encountered a passenger who could teach such a complex lesson in authority, patience, and grace. He realized that leadership was not about enforcing rules or asserting dominance, but about recognizing the presence and competence of others. Meanwhile, the SEAL colonel remained seated, observing the reactions of passengers with quiet attentiveness. She noticed subtle gestures: a child staring in awe, a businessman whispering to a colleague, a young woman carefully recording her expression on a phone. None of these reactions required her attention or validation, yet they served as a reminder of the impact presence alone can have. She understood instinctively that influence is often silent, expressed in the way one carries oneself, the way one responds to stress, and the way one allows others to correct mistakes without escalating conflict. As the flight continued, conversations inside the cabin drifted toward speculation about her career. "She must have led missions we can't even imagine," one passenger whispered to another. "She's probably saved countless lives," someone else added. Cameras captured her composed demeanor, her calm interactions with the crew, and the subtle but unmistakable confidence she radiated. The ordinary flight had been transformed into a living classroom, teaching lessons in respect, humility, and the extraordinary power of quiet authority. Even those who had initially been annoyed or impatient now sat in reflective silence. They had witnessed something remarkable: a passenger who, through presence alone, had corrected misjudgments, taught lessons in humility, and left a lasting impression without confrontation or drama. The ordinary interactions of an airport terminal and boarding gate had become a stage for a demonstration of what true leadership looks like when exercised with discipline and composure. The pilot, still processing the events, reflected further. He had assumed that enforcing protocol would demonstrate his authority, but in reality, it had highlighted the limits of position-based power. The SEAL colonel, through decades of rigorous training, dangerous missions, and high-stakes leadership, embodied a type of authority that cannot be faked or assumed. He realized that true respect is earned, not demanded, and that leadership is most powerful when it inspires rather than intimidates. Jessica, the flight attendant, glanced toward the colonel and offered a polite nod, acknowledging her presence and the respect she had earned. The colonel responded with a subtle nod in return, a gesture of mutual recognition. It was a quiet interaction, but one that spoke volumes: the the power of acknowledgement, the subtle reinforcement of authority through respect and composure. Passengers continued to reflect on the events, many pulling out their phones to share the story with friends and family. Even without revealing classified details of her military career, the narrative alone, the calm removal, the verification of her identity, the pilot's apology, and her graceful acceptance, had captured imaginations. Everyone who witnessed it understood that they had seen something extraordinary, a demonstration of courage, authority, and human dignity that transcended ordinary life. As the flight neared cruising altitude, the SEAL colonel relaxed slightly, yet her posture remained disciplined, her gaze attentive. She observed the passengers, nodding their curiosity and admiration, and recognized the subtle shifts in their perception. By remaining composed, she had demonstrated that influence and authority need not be loud or forceful. They can be expressed through patience, skill, and the quiet assurance of experience. The pilot, now fully humbled, reflected on how the incident had reshaped his understanding of leadership. He realized that authority is not measured solely by position, rules, or enforcement, but by the ability to inspire respect, navigate misunderstandings with grace, and maintain composure under scrutiny. The SEAL colonel had done all of this effortlessly, teaching a lesson that no training manual could replicate. Passengers who had been recording the scene began sharing clips on social media, capturing not only the event but also the energy, the composure, and the authority of the colonel. The story began to spread, not because of drama or confrontation, but because of the remarkable display of calm strength, humility, and professionalism. Each whisper, nod, and careful movement was a lesson in presence that resonated far beyond the aircraft. The SEAL colonel's departure from the plane, later that evening, would be marked not by fanfare or ceremony but by subtle acknowledgement and quiet respect. Passengers would recall the grace with which she had handled an ordinary travel mishap, turning it into a story of authority, leadership, and human dignity. For many, it would remain a lasting memory, a demonstration of how composure, experience, and integrity can influence and inspire even in mundane situations. As the flight landed, passengers applauded lightly, not for her rank, not for her accolades, but for the example she had set. The pilot, now fully humbled, personally ensured her safe disembarkation. Security officers, passengers, and crew alike carried with them a sense of awe and reflection. The ordinary airport terminal, once a stage for misunderstanding, had become a theater for a profound human lesson in respect and leadership. The SEAL colonel walked through the terminal with her characteristic poise, unnoticed by many but remembered vividly by those who had been present. Her legacy on that flight would not be recorded in accolades or press releases, but in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed her composure, her discipline, and her quiet authority. The story would be retold countless times, a testament to the power of presence and the lessons embedded in everyday interactions. In the end, the event was more than a boarding dispute. It was a story of human perception, humility, and the enduring impact of true leadership. The SEAL colonel had demonstrated that authority need not be loud, that respect is earned through composure, skill, and patience, and that even ordinary moments can carry extraordinary lessons. For the pilot, crew, and passengers, it was a moment of reflection, inspiration, and awe, one they would carry with them long after leaving the aircraft. The plane emptied, travelers dispersed, and the terminal returned to its usual rhythm. Yet for those who had been present, the memory remained vivid. The quiet SEAL colonel who had been misjudged, the pilot who had learned humility, and the passengers who had witnessed a living example of grace under scrutiny. A simple flight had been transformed into a story of courage, leadership, and the subtle yet undeniable power of true authority. And as the terminal lights flickered and the evening crowd moved on, one truth remained. Some people, through quiet presence, unwavering discipline, and decades of extraordinary experience, leave an impression that transcends ordinary understanding. They teach lessons not with words or confrontation, but with the simple act of being themselves, composed, skilled, and undeniably remarkable. The SEAL colonel had done exactly that.